continue our sermon series. I'm glad for those of you who were able to join us for our moment of fellowship as we ate some breakfast, got some food in our stomachs, and decided to still have church anyway, despite the fact that we're all tired and want to nap now. Maybe I'm only talking about myself, but I know I'm not, because I've gotten some warnings about how long this sermon should take. So you'll be happy to know this is probably going to be the longest one of the series. We got a lot of ground to cover today. Today is also 9/11. I'm sure most of you probably already know that. And I woke up this morning, and it's a day of remembrance in our country of what happened 21 years ago, which somehow makes me feel old, even though I wasn't old when that really happened. I was like 3 or 4. But I woke up this morning, and I was kind of thinking about that, and kind of thinking about how that can kind of be remembered in today's message. For the most part, I try not to really do that with my sermons, but I figured it actually kind of works today. So, as many of you know, after the events of 9/11 happened, we went to war in Afghanistan. So we went to war in Afghanistan, and we decided to fight terrorism overseas. And so one of the things that kind of went on throughout this war was a lot of devastation, a lot of mayhem, a lot of destruction over in the Middle East, and a lot of Americans who gave their lives for that fight. Now, one of the things that I wanted to kind of emphasize is sort of the call of duty that people went through during that time. And more accurately, those who went beyond the call of duty, which is often awarded as something that I'm sure you are familiar with. It's called the Congressional Medal of Honor. There were several people throughout the Afghanistan war that achieved the Medal of Honor. And so essentially what happens with the Medal of Honor is soldiers who go to fight for our country, they are typically in battle. Most of the time that's what ends up receiving the Medal of Honor, is some kind of heroic action in battle. And so what ends up happening for the most part, which I don't know how many of you guys know this, but many people who receive the Medal of Honor, they receive it after they've already died. Many of them do not live to actually see that medal, and oftentimes it's awarded to their family because they have given their lives. Many have received it for jumping on live grenades in order to save their comrades in arms. Many have chosen to give their lives because they were in a very overwhelming battle situation, and so they risked their lives to go and save other people. They chose to call for help. They risked their lives calling for help, calling for aid. One of the things that always just kind of comes to mind, to give you guys a quick little mental image about typically what receives the Medal of Honor, I have to go with Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump, right? Like, many of us have probably seen Forrest Gump. I was always told until I saw that movie I wasn't a true American if I hadn't seen it. So, naturally, I had to watch it. So, Forrest Gump, he goes to Vietnam. He's serving in the Vietnam War, and he's running, and he's doing what, he was always told, run, Forrest, run. And he takes off running, he runs away from danger, realizes that his friends aren't there. And so he runs back to danger, grabs a friend, runs him out of danger. Realizes that there's another friend, so he runs, grabs that friend, brings it back in. These kinds of acts of heroism is often what is awarded with the Medal of Honor, these different acts of heroism and these acts of valor. And the question that I want to pose to us today as we look at a character in the Bible, a person who steps into this role of royalty and kind of goes above and beyond this call of duty, so to speak, I want to ask, if it were in regards to your faith, in regards to the way that you live out your faith, would you receive a biblical Medal of Honor? When it comes to how we walk and how we live as Christians, would you be able to receive a biblical Medal of Honor? And that's not a real thing. I'm making that up. It's a metaphor. So bear with me. We should have one. I'm sure God awards those. I'm not qualified to be handing those out, but God can. So as we look, we're going to be looking in the book of Esther. Now, since the beginning of this sermon series, we've been looking at royalty, and I made a promise that we were going to be looking at kings and queens, and really there's one queen that we're going to look at, and her name is Esther. Now, there weren't really a whole lot of examples of queens found in Israelite royalty, and honestly, this really isn't different. There's a very different situation happening in the book of Esther, and so to kind of give you guys a history of what has led up to this point as we approach the book of Esther, and if you want to turn there early, we're going to be really late in the book of Esther. We'll be in Esther chapter 7. So if you want to turn there, you can. If you're following along in your notes, you've probably already seen that on the Bible app. But here's what has happened. We talked about our king last week. We talked about King Josiah last week. Now, King Josiah was pretty much the very last good king of Judah. He was the last good king of Judah. His son, his son's sons, they all chose to walk away from the Lord and how they chose to rule. They did what was evil in the Lord's sight. That's a very common description that we see in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, as well as 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and the history of the kingship of Israel and of Judah. We see a lot of wickedness and a lot of people turning away. Now, if you remember from last week, we talked about how King Josiah is going to be spared from coming destruction of his nation. And as we look at Esther, that destruction has already come. Babylon has already come, and they have already overthrown Judah. They've already torn down Jerusalem. They've torn down Israel, the nation of Israel, and the nation of Judah. They've destroyed both of them, and the Israelites have lived in what is known as the Babylonian Exile. And so this is a time period, if you think of the book of Daniel and some of the prophets later on in the Old Testament, past where we're kind of at right now, as far as the Bible goes, not chronologically, but the books of the Bible and how they're organized, the books that kind of come after where we're at now, those deal a lot with the Babylonian exile and what life was like for Israel and their people during that time. Now, what happens after the Babylonian exile is a group of people known as the Persians. They come in and they overthrow Babylon. So Babylon is ruling over the nation of Israel. They have captured all of their people. They've exiled them. And now Persia has come in and has kicked Babylon out. They've overthrown the Babylonians. And so now we are at a point where Israelites are kind of in this exile within the Persian kingdom. So rather than Babylon, they're now under Persian rule. And this is where we get the story of Esther, as well as like Nehemiah, Ezra, a lot of these other books of the Bible. They also take place during that Persian Empire. What ends up happening in the story of Esther is the king of Persia, his wife does some things that he's just not really fond of, like basically she stands up for herself and it's like, I'm not going to publicly humiliate myself. And back in the day, that's a bad thing. We don't live in that time now, like women stand up for themselves all the time. Back then, you didn't do that. Like, that just didn't happen. That was a good way to die. Like, let's be real. Welcome to the Persian Empire. So that kind of happens, and so the king starts looking for a new wife, a new queen, who is going to be this matriarch that his kingdom can look to. Somebody who's going to be a nice little trophy wife, somebody who's beautiful, somebody who is a very loving person, and somebody who knows how to do what they're told. Like, that's kind of what Persian kings are looking for, And so that's kind of what's going on. And there's this process of all of these girls from throughout the entire Persian Empire who take part in this sort of, welcome to the Persian version of, the Persian version of, like, The Bachelor. So I don't know if any of you guys, like, watch that show. You watch The Bachelor, and you're all about that drama of, like, watching this dude who's, like, good-looking, and, like, all these girls are like, I would love to, show him how much I care about him by doing whatever he asks and trying to be the perfect, person. I don't know if you guys watch that show. I 100% do not, because that just does not seem entertaining to me. But that's kind of what's going on. So we have the Persian version of the Bachelor kind of going on, and what ends up happening through a long process is Esther ends up being selected. Right, so she's like this lovey-dovey person that like the king is just like totally infatuated with. Like she's super good looking, and so he's like, that's one that I want. Like, thank you ladies for your tryout. Thanks for coming to the audition. You didn't make the cut. Bye. I'm going with her. And so they get cut from the show. The director has to give them their little paycheck and like send them on their way. Like, thanks for being a part of it. And so the king of Persia, Artaxerxes, he takes Esther as his wife and his new queen. Through a long line of events to get us to the point that we're at now, Esther's people, the Jews, the Israelites, they are about to face extermination. There's this very wicked man, his name is Haman, and ultimately he's sort of an advisor to the king, and his idea is to assert or to gain as much power as he possibly can. To gain as much power as he possibly can. If King Artaxerxes is number one, he wants to be number two. And so he is looking for the king's kind of authority. He wants like kingly authority over people, sort of this governor idea. And so Haman's kind of pursuing this in the background of this Esther narrative, and one of the things that ends up happening is this man named Mordecai, who is cousins of Esther, like he's related to Esther, so he is also a Jew. He ends up saving the king from an assassination. So in this sort of like God-given irony that plays out, because Haman is such a trusted person by the king looks to honor Mordecai. And so the king is like, he says, Haman, I want some ideas. I want a nice little perspective. Like, I trust you. You're a good advisor. Like, I trust you with my whole life, and I want your advice. I'm looking to honor a great man who's done a great thing. And so Haman is naturally like, hey, like, this is all about me. Like, I'm that guy. Like, he's wanting to honor me. And so he starts to get these ideas. And so the king says, how should I honor this person? And Haman kind of gives this huge, illustrious way that this great man who did a great thing for the king should be celebrated. He should get to ride on the king's horse. He should be adorned in jewels and extravagant gifts. And everybody should bow and worship him. And everybody should do these things. He's like, man, that's a good idea. The king starts thinking, he's like, that is a great way to honor such a man. So he puts Mordecai on his horse, and Haman is furious. Haman is incredibly furious because even to this point, Haman has this power where people ought to be bowing down and worshiping him, and Mordecai has chosen not to. And so Haman's already mad at Mordecai for not giving him the reverence that he feels he's entitled to. And so he already has bad blood with the Jews. And now on top of that, he's just mad at Mordecai for being honored in such an extravagant way. And so Haman decides to take to the king that there's a group of people known as the Jews that they don't take the king seriously. They don't take his rule, his reign seriously. They have this God that they're going to bow down to, and they're most certainly not going to bow down to any kind of Persian king, and they do not take him seriously. And so Haman comes up with this idea that all of the Jews ought to be eradicated within the Persian kingdom. Neither Haman nor King Artaxerxes know that this group of people are the same people that Queen Esther comes from. And so as this is played out, Mordecai comes along with this information, and he gains this knowledge of what Haman is plotting, and he goes to Esther, and he asks Esther a very serious question. He tells her the whole situation of what Haman is plotting, and his request is that she would talk to the king. That she would go before the king and ask him to change his mind. This puts Esther in a very serious, dire predicament. To go before the king without being summoned meant death. It meant that you did not care about what the king says. You did not care about how politics worked. You did not care about his authority. And so to go before the king and basically summon the king rather than have him summon you was a death sentence. Mordecai is asking Esther to give up her life for her people. And Esther knows what's being asked. And at first she's worried. And at first she is incredibly worried about what this would mean for her if she were to go on behalf of her people to the king without being asked. And through kind of prayer and consideration of what's going on, she comes to the decision that she will do as Mordecai has asked. That she will go to the king on behalf of her people. And I know I've given you a lot of backstory, but trust me, if I were to just read the first 6 chapters, it would have taken a lot longer. So now we approach Esther chapter 7. It says this in verse 1. The king and Haman came to a feast with Esther the queen. Once again, on the second day, while drinking wine, the king asked Esther, Queen Esther, whatever you ask will be given to you. Whatever you seek, even half the kingdom, it will be done. Queen Esther answered, If I have found favor in your eyes, Your Majesty, and if the king is pleased, spare my life. This is my desire, or this is my request, and spare my people. This is my desire. For my people and I have been sold to destruction, death, and extermination. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept silent. Indeed, the trouble wouldn't be worth burdening the king. King Ahasuerus spoke up and asked Queen Esther, Who is this, and where is the one who would devise such a scheme? Esther answered, The adversary and enemy is this evil Haman. Haman stood terrified before the king and queen. The king arose in anger and went from where they were drinking wine to the palace garden. Haman remained to beg Queen Esther for his life because he realized the king was planning something terrible for him. We find Esther in this very serious situation. Notice that she has to ask the king to spare her life before she even brings her real request before the king. And this is something, in my head, this is something that plays out very beautifully. This shows the integrity and the character of who Esther is. Because here's the thing. Esther understands her duty to her people and this moment that Mordecai has said, this is why you are here in the first place. This is what you were made for. This is why God has put you where you are, is for a moment like this. And she realizes this duty that she has to the people of God. And on top of that, she recognizes the duty to her king. She recognizes what she needs to do for her people, but she also recognizes that it's really not her place to make this request. And I find this whole story kind of beautifully unfolding of Esther having such great character and such great integrity that the king can't help but be completely infatuated and in love with who Esther is. Not just with her beauty, but with who she is. He is pleased with her. And she asks and wants to make sure that she has favor with her king before bringing her request. And she can kind of see her king start to relax his shoulders just being in her presence. And she sees him giving in already to this admiration that he has for her. And he says, whatever you ask, even if it's up to half of my kingdom, whatever you ask, it'll be given. This is not some political issue. This is not some I'm going to try to please the queen, because she's my queen and I married her as a princess, and so, her dad is a king of another kingdom. That's not what we have going on here. This is not what has been going on like it did in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, and it's kind of what we've seen unfolding as people have taken these political wives and these political husbands and things like that in order to advance their kingdom. That's not what's going on. The Persian Empire is one of the leading empires that is growing exponentially. They're very successful as far as their military goes. They don't really need political alliances. They're out here crushing their enemies like it's nothing. Because of who Esther is, because of her heart, the king finds favor with her. And so Esther asks for this one thing to be done, that her people would be spared. That her people are being attacked, that they are going to be eradicated, and the king says, who would even dare to do something like that to the people of my queen? And Esther says, that guy, your second in command. And the king is furious. Haman realizes what's gone on. He's caught in this deer in the headlights moment. He had zero idea that Queen Esther came from the same people as Mordecai. And he begs and pleads for his life. And as the story continues to unfold, Esther pleads for her people. And essentially Haman is hung and he is executed. And Esther's people are spared. The duty that Esther had was accomplished. Now, I've summarized a lot, and I want to go kind of back sort of chronologically in time and back in time as far as the Bible goes. We're going to be going a few chapters back. We're going to look at Esther chapter 4. I wanted to save this little tidbit for last. Esther chapter 4, verse 17 through 17, it says this. Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Remember, Mordecai asks Esther to go to the king on their behalf and to hopefully save her people, and has been told, maybe you were established as queen for such a time as this. And this is her reply. Go and assemble all the Jews who can be found in Susa and fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my female servants will also fast in the same way. After that, I will go to the king, even if it is against the law. If I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went and did everything Esther had commanded. When faced with this task, to go before the king and plead for her people and fulfill her duty towards her people and towards God. Fulfill her duty when she is faced with death and with transgression of the law. Her response is, if I perish, I perish. I want you to think about the soldiers that I was kind of describing at the beginning of the sermon. Those who would be willing to jump on a grenade for their comrades. That is a mentality of, if I perish, I perish. But at least my team is safe. At least my people are taken care of. If I perish, I perish. This brings us to our final our point for today, and it's this. A royal heart does its duty. As Christians, we have been given a duty, a responsibility to go and witness and tell others about who God is and tell them about what He has done for us by sending His Son. And our mentality, if we're going to be somebody who is willing to say, if I perish, I perish, our duty should be to say that if it means expanding the kingdom of God. If it means looking out for those who are around us, if it means going and telling others in a foreign country about who Jesus is and what He did, if I perish, but at least I died doing my duty. But we all have personal duties in regards to our faith. I don't know what yours is. I can't quite tell you. That is something between you and God. But if something gets placed on your heart, and if the Holy Spirit starts to expose it as coming from Him, then that's your duty. Will you pursue it? Will you do your duty? There's no real such thing as the biblical Medal of Honor. But my question for you is this, that as you leave church and as you face the other 6 days of the week where it's not completely surrounded by fellow Christians, as you are kind of in the trenches, so to speak, are you doing what it takes to achieve that kind of Medal of Honor? When it comes to your duty and your service to your God and your kingdom. And I don't mean your duty to the country, I mean the duty to the kingdom of heaven. Will you do it? Will you do your duty? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day that you've given us. God, I thank you for Esther. I thank you for her heart, that we can see what has been going on in it. God, that we can see your heart reflected in hers. God, that when her people faced extinction and detriment, God, that she was willing to stand on their behalf. God, that even if it meant that she would lose her own life, she was willing to do it because it was the right thing to do. God, I pray that we would do the same. God, we are currently seeing a culture that is just so opposed to you. God, we live in a world where people want to do their own thing and tell us that the Bible is just some outdated book that has no real impact on our current cultural climate. God, I pray that we would just deny those lies to the father of lies. God, that we would take your word with us wherever we go, that we would spread it like the seed that it is. God, that we would search hearts that are open and receptive to who you are. God, I pray that we would do our duty, regardless of the trials and temptations that come our way. And it's in your son's name that we pray. Amen. The band is going to come up and lead us in one final song. This will be the time of invitation. If you have any prayers that you'd like to have lifted up, or any decisions that you would like to make, now would be the time.